Good morning. I want to talk today about the recent American presidential election, what some of the astrological positives were for each candidate going into that election, and what the results of the election might mean for America and the world, and a little bit about what's ahead. Now, before going any further, let me state that I'm a supporter of Kamala Harris. I support the Democratic agenda for the most part. So, if you're a Trump supporter, if you're strongly to the right, uh, this might not be the presentation that you want to hear. You could say that I have my biases, and I can't disagree with that. I prefer one side over the other, and the results of the election have me extremely worried. With that said, let me continue. Okay, I'll share my screen, and just give me a second here. And I need to get rid of some panels so I can see what I'm doing. This will take just a few more seconds. So hold on. And yes, this is it. America has fallen. The aftermath of the 2024 election. And you can pretty much tell from the title which side of the political spectrum I fall on. Okay, well, let's continue. Now, the 2024 American presidential race was close both in the polls and in the stars. Nonetheless, there were many astrologers who could not resist the temptation to predict that one candidate or the other would win the election. In my opinion, engaging in such fortune telling is a mistake, and here's why. A famous saying known to most astrologers is, "The stars impel, they do not compel." In other words, they urge us to take certain paths, but they do not force us to do so. The bottom line is that we have the free will to make the final decisions on our own. Thus, astrology is really more like a cosmic weather report. It gives us the probabilities of various outcomes, but not the certainty. In that regard, it is also very much like quantum physics. Through astrology, we can ascertain whether certain outcomes are more likely or less likely, but the final result depends upon our own decisions and not the stars. Hence, those astrologers who only describe the weather as probable outcomes are often correct, while those who make absolute predictions are frequently wrong. In the case of the 2024 American presidential election, there were astrological conditions that favored each of the candidates, and there were also astrological challenges for each candidate. But the final result was determined not by the stars, but by how individual people chose to react to the influences of the stars. Thus, in this slideshow, I'll review for each candidate and for America some of the indicators that were present astrologically for the 2024 election. I'm not going to have time to go over every single little thing, but I will go over some of the indicators I noted, and how a Trump victory will likely affect things in the road ahead. I'll begin with Kamala's transits on November 5th. Now, astrologically, both Harris and Trump currently have configurations that indicate that their stars are rising, and that is why the presidential race was so close. However, simply because there can be only one winner doesn't negate the fact that they both have risen in prominence. In Kamala's chart, Saturn is in the 10th house, right up here, and that usually elevates a person. This is transiting Saturn in the 10th house. In contrast, Biden's transiting Saturn is now near the bottom of his chart, and he wound up dropping out of the race. In Kamala's progress chart, she currently has her progress sun trine her natal moon. sextile her natal sun, and sextile her natal Saturn. Again, even though she lost the election, there is no doubt that she has experienced a sudden rise to greater prominence. So, having her progressed sun make all these beneficial aspects to planets in her natal chart, this has really elevated her and brought her into the limelight. However, her outer planet transits for November and December are mostly negative. Everything's red here except for a little bit of blue in the very first few days of November. If she had won the presidency, then this would likely have indicated a period in which she would have put her nose to the grindstone to get a lot of work done in preparation. However, with the loss, the hard transits from Saturn suggest restriction, restriction and frustration, and blockages and going forward. With transiting Jupiter conjunct Trump's lunar nodal axis, so I'm looking at Donald Trump's chart now and some transits. And with that transiting Jupiter conjunct his lunar nodal axis in a sun-moon opposition, right here, this by itself would normally suggest that he would be the winner. Jupiter is a benefic, expands things, it brings good luck. However, Kamala also had good astrological aspects, and again, that's why the race was so close. Additionally, with Uranus conjunct his midheaven, Trump's midheaven right here, a sudden change in Trump's status is suggested, and that change could be either positive or negative. As it turned out, the change has been one that has elevated him back to the presidency. Furthermore, transiting Uranus is sextile Trump's natal Venus right here, and Venus is the ruler of his 10th house. That's the house of status in society. And that too suggests a positive change in his status. In his progress chart, by the way, a progress chart is calculated by equating each day after birth with a year of one's life. And mathematically, we could say this is all based upon the fact that all circles look alike, and a circle is just a cycle. So all cycles have this natural kind of equivalence. And thus, psychologically speaking, what happens halfway through a single day has a resonance with the halfway point through a single year. Okay, so in Trump's progress chart, Trump has progressed Venus trine his 10th house. That is extremely favorable. And since Venus is the ruler of his 10th house, that too is a good indication of success. Hence, as I've said, both candidates have some very favorable aspects that have helped to bring them where they are, but there can only be one winner. And simply because you're the loser, that doesn't mean that there weren't favorable aspects bringing you to this point. Okay, now if we look at Trump's transits for the rest of November, what stands out is transiting Uranus sextile natal Venus right here, last almost the entire month of November, and transiting Jupiter, trinatal Jupiter. That kicks in the last maybe third of the month, roughly, and goes into December. And this Jupiter aspect, Jupiter trine Jupiter, which is very strong in the latter part of November, is very favorable. And as I've said in other videos, it's difficult to understand why Trump would be so happy at this point later in November if he had lost. And sure enough, he won. For better or worse, he won. Okay. Now, in the coming year, though, Trump will experience several tense aspects involving Saturn, Uranus, and Chiron. And given his age, who knows how long he will last. So there is going to be a lot of tension in the coming year for Trump, a lot of stresses he'll have to deal with. Many of these involve Saturn, and Saturn usually brings restriction, frustration, and delays. At its best, Saturn is control, regulation, and discipline. But when Trump has squares, they don't usually work out in the best way. So we can expect a lot of restriction in one way or another for Trump in the year to come. He has transiting Saturn making all of these aspects. He also has Chiron, which can cause wounding, making a square to his natal Saturn. He has also Chiron making a square to his natal Venus. Venus rules his 10th house of status. So during these periods, May, June, and September, October, there could be some wounding to his status as president. Also, transiting Uranus brings unexpected changes and reversals, and he will have transiting Uranus conjunct his midheaven from about mid-February through mid-April. It's exact on March 22nd, where I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. So there could be some big changes in his status at this point. And then later in July, he will have transiting Uranus square his ascendant. And that happens again in mid-October through November. So again, these are times when there could be some abrupt changes in his life. Okay, now this chart here, it shows progressed planets to natal planets. And these are going to be conjunctions, squares, and oppositions that will occur between 2024 and 2027. So there are also progressed aspects to Trump's natal chart that could result in changes to his status or possible physical injury. He could even die abruptly at any time over the next few years. That is a consequence of having a progressed moon square his natal Pluto and progressed Mars. Let's see, oh, over here, squaring his natal Chiron, causing some sort of wounding, probably of a physical nature. Uh, Dying, of course, that would be an extreme result, but that's on the table. That's a possibility. It's just simply not necessarily the most likely. When his progressed Venus, by the way, is square natal Venus, since Venus has a lot to do with his status, there could be some difficulties in mid 25 through mid 2027. Okay, now let's take a look at America. For America, I prefer the July 2nd chart for the passage of the Declaration for Independence. For those who don't know, the Continental Congress passed the Declaration of Independence on July 2nd, and then on July 4th, that result was made public. On July 4th, they told General George Washington of this decision, and they printed up copies of the Declaration for Independence and distributed that to the people. Okay, so the July 2nd chart, that is usually my preferred chart. However, the creation of America was not a single event. It was a process that took place over time. Hence, several charts are valid for America. July 2nd was when America declared independence, and July 4th was when this result was made public. One of the main differences, though, is that on July 2nd, the moon was in Capricorn, while on July 4th, the moon was in Aquarius. I tend to see this Aquarian moon as representing America's public persona. The public persona, because that is the day that this decision went public. And that public persona is one of promoting freedom, democracy, humanitarianism, and technology. In contrast, the Capricorn moon represents our darker side that seeks to control women, minorities, and other countries. So the July 2nd chart with Moon in Capricorn, I see that chart as representing maybe a little bit more who we really are on the inside. The July 4th chart is how we like to imagine ourselves to be. This wonderful democratic country spreading freedom and democracy throughout the world and sharing our technology with everyone and also giving lots to charity. And we are that to a large extent, but we also have our shadow side, our darker side. And we see that shadow in terms of those things that we don't like to focus on or admit. For instance, our history, our long history with slavery, our genocidal approach to the Native American community, the way we are seeking to control uh, a woman's ability to make her own health decisions right now, the way several minorities are now being oppressed, whether they're Asians or Hispanic or, you know, Haitians, Black Lives That Matter, or others. And of course, we have had a long history of trying to control the actions of other countries. With our great wealth and great power, we have often, in the past, coerced countries into doing things the way we want them done. So that's all our Capricorn moon, in my opinion. And that's a part of us. That's our inner self, and in many ways, our shadow side. Whereas the moon in Aquarius that we see in the July 4th charts, that is the way we like to see ourselves. And as I said, we are that too. Okay, now let's look at some transits to this July 2nd, 1776 chart for America. A sextile from transiting Uranus to natal Mercury is good for trade and the stock market. And some astrologers saw the trine from transiting Uranus to the natal moon as an indication that we might elect a woman. We did have a prominent female candidate in the election. So that influence works. But at the same time, this trine right here might have also made it easier for Americans to slip into the dark side of Capricorn, authoritarianism, oppression, and fascism. Okay, this is very interesting. We often call trines and sextiles good aspects and squares and oppositions bad aspects. That's not quite accurate. It would be a little bit more accurate to call trines and sextiles easy aspects. Uh, they represent something that is easy to do. And then we could call squares and oppositions difficult aspects. When you have a square and opposition between two planets, coordination between those two planetary drives is a little bit more difficult and challenging. That doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be bad. It just means we have some obstacles to overcome. But with transiting Uranus making a trine to the moon, that can bring about a lot of creativity and a lot of other good things. It makes for good coordination between Uranus and the moon. But if the moon is set on promoting authoritarianism, oppression, and fascism, well, this good aspect, it makes it easier to accomplish those goals. So this trine between transiting Uranus and the natal moon, that could have played a role in this election. We could have see some of our slip into what I see as the dark side happening as a result of this trine. And I mentioned here that the sextile between transiting Uranus and natal Mercury, that's good for trade in the stock market. And of course, over the past couple of days on November 5th, November 6th, the stock market has had a sudden dramatic reversal and gone up quite a bit. Sudden changes, that's Uranus, and Mercury, as I said, uh, rules trade and the stock market and other things. So we've seen that beneficial result too. Now, another aspect that can cut both ways is transiting Chiron conjunct natal Chiron. It's almost exact. This aspect can bring either healing and transcendent joy to America or great wounding to the country. And I think we're seeing both. Kamala's campaign was about the former. And remember, she often talked about a politics of joy. But I note that Trump's Chiron at 14 degrees Libra is strongly conjunct America's natal Saturn, which is also at 14 plus degrees Libra. Hence, I am now expecting more wounding to America in the coming years, unfortunately. Also, in the interaction between America's progress chart and natal chart, that's what I have in this bi-wheel. I have that July 2nd chart on the inside, July 2nd, 1776 for America. And I have, let's see, America's progress chart, progressed to the date November 5th on the outside. And if we look at the interaction between these two charts, there is a square between progressed Jupiter and natal Saturn. This has manifested as the current divide in America between progressives and conservatives. Jupiter, the benefic, the great benefic, which wants expansion and growth and equal opportunity for all. This represents the progressive influence. Saturn, uh, the great malefic, as some call it, it really represents our drives to control and regulate ourselves. And we actually need both these drives. We need to grow and expand, but do that growth within a framework of regulation so that we don't lose control. That's how things should work out. But when we favor only one of these drives over the other, or when these two drives are in a tense relationship with one another, then we don't have the proper coordination between growth and regulation that we need. And that's where we are now. Uh, Jupiter, in this case, represents the progressives in the country. Saturn represents the conservatives, and they're at odds with one another. So this has manifested as the current divide in America between progressives and conservatives. The aspect began around 2009. So that would be when Obama took office, and it will last throughout much of 2046, but will be strongest from 2025 to 2028. Okay, so we've always had this tension in the country between progressives and conservatives, but historically and astrologically, you could argue that it became more pronounced during the Obama administration, and it's increasing in strength. And right now, when we seem to still be incredibly divided uh, between progressives and conservatives, this square is going to be at its strongest for the next 3 years from 2025 uh, through a lot of 2028. So that's actually going to be about 4 years. And this is when we are most at risk, for instance, for something like another American Civil War. Okay, additionally, the November 3rd opposition between transiting Mars and transiting Pluto. Here I'm just looking at transit to transit. Um, let's see, aspects. And let's see, this opposition between Mars and Pluto, it was exact on November 3rd. Uh, you can kind of ignore the time here. If you look at the place where this chart is set up, I see it was set up for Valencia, Spain, rather than Scottsdale, Arizona, where I live. That's because I had recently been looking at the astrology behind the floods in Valencia, and I simply forgot to change my location from Valencia, Spain, back to Scottsdale, Arizona. But that's not going to make any difference in what I'm saying here. This opposition was in effect before it became exact and still in effect after it's past that point of exactness. So, that opposition between transiting Mars and transiting Pluto likely irritated many people just enough so that they chose to vote against the party currently in control of the White House. And this happened despite the many positive trines and sextiles present on election day. So you can look at this chart, you see a lot of trines, you see a grand trine, you see a lot of sextiles. There is a lot of harmony out there. But if you have something that's irritating you, that tends to override everything else. The irritation always comes to the forefront, even though there's some good feelings and some harmony in the background. The good news is we did not have widespread violence on election day, but everyone, not only in America, but in the world, will experience or feel on some level this irritation caused by Pluto in opposition to Mars. Pluto represents the great powers out there. Mars is our more of our personal anger. And with Mars and Cancer, our personal insecurities and worries about our own home and our home environment. And I might also point out, let me go back here just a second where we can see America's chart. Here we go. Look at where Pluto is in America's chart. This is going to be pretty much the same whether you use a July 2nd chart or a July 4th chart. Pluto is at 27 plus degrees of Capricorn. In this chart, 27 degrees, 36 minutes. That's pretty close to this 29 degrees Capricorn that transiting Pluto is currently at. So this opposition is affecting America even more than most of the rest of the world. Now, unfortunately, America will face several astrological challenges over the next few years. And there's a heightened risk that we will become actively involved with either civil wars at home or wars abroad. And even before historians were talking about this, a lot of historians have been talking about how things in America now are very similar to what they were before the American Civil War. But even before historians pointed that out, astrologers had already noted that we are already repeating conditions that preceded the American Civil War. Those are astrological conditions that preceded the American Civil War. They're being repeated now. And with Trump as president, I believe the likelihood of disaster may now be even greater. Okay, again, these are transits to that July 2nd, 1776 chart for America, covering the period 2025 through 2027. And I've put some rectangles around times which are going to be extra tense. So for a lot of 2025 and almost half of 2026, look at what we have. Neptune squares Venus. That happens 3 times. That's exact. This is something we have to keep an eye on because when the American Civil War began, Neptune was squaring Venus. We also have Chiron, transing Chiron square natal Mercury. That can denote some sort of wounding, and in particular, financial wounding or wounding involving trade and commerce. We have transing Chiron making a square to the natal moon at the same time, and that means that the people could feel very wounded. And we have Saturn making a square to natal Venus. That results that the people will be feeling very frustrated. Venus is what it's exactly the same as what Sigmund Freud called the pleasure principle, our desire to reduce tension. And things which reduce tension, things which make us feel good in the real world, we tend to call those things good. And things which increase our level of tension, we tend to call those things bad. So Venus also has a connection with the nonverbal right brain. Venus represents that nonverbal map that we make of what we see as good and what we see as bad. And that is how Venus comes to be associated with our value system. So our values are going to be frustrated. What we feel as good is going to experience frustration. Our pursuit of pleasure is going to be frustrated. Okay, now down here, we have another long period of some tension. Chiron, transing Chiron, will be square natal Pluto. That could impact or wound uh, the nation's power in general and the president in particular, since he is the most powerful person in the nation. We also have Saturn square natal Sun, transiting Saturn. That's going to coincide roughly with transing Chiron square Pluto. And in a country's chart, the Sun can represent not only the soul of the nation, but also the leader of the nation. And then we'll also have transing Saturn in opposition to natal Saturn during this period. And when that transit is active, we will collectively be experiencing a lot of frustration and a lot of restriction. Okay, in 2027, let's see, we're going to have, it looks like Saturn square the natal moon and Saturn square natal Pluto. That is also going to be more frustration and restriction related to the public and to the president, people in power. And that, when I say people in power, I mean more than just the president. That could be leaders in Congress, that could be financial leaders. So, in looking at this, we see a lot of the difficult aspects are going to involve Saturn, and they're also going to involve Chiron. And that suggests some frustration and some wounding that will be happening from 2025 through 2027. And then in 2027, we're going to have two Uranus returns, two conjunctions of transing Uranus with natal Uranus. There will be a third one that happens in 2028, but I just didn't have enough room to put that one there. But this is something we want to keep an eye on because, let's see, in July 1776, Uranus was at about 8+ degrees of Gemini. And we had the American Revolution going on at that time. The next time transing Uranus reached that point, we had the American Civil War. And then following that, the next time transiting Uranus was at 8+ degrees of Gemini. We were involved in World War II. And around the time that that transit, excuse me, got clear in my throat a little bit. Sorry about that. The next time that transiting Uranus was conjunct natal Uranus in the 1940s. As I said, we were involved in World War II, and that was around the time that we began the Manhattan Project, where we began purifying uranium so that we could make the world's first atomic bomb. And notice the similarities between the words Uranus and uranium. It's quite interesting. Okay, now I'm looking at some transit to transit activity, and I just want to point out some good things that lie ahead. Astrologically, we're currently living during a time of great change. We have been through a pandemic and wars in Ukraine and Israel, and many of these tribulations were foreseen astrologically. And if we didn't see them beforehand, we usually went back afterwards and understood astrologically why these things were going on. If you look over here, well, let me read the best of this first, and then I'll explain these charts a little bit. Some better times certainly lie ahead as several outer planets change signs and make harmonious aspects with one another. But it is unlikely that Trump is in sync with the future the world is moving into. That's a problem. Also, Pluto has been lingering at the last degree of Capricorn for some time now. That last degree is called the anaretic degree, and that anaretic degree usually brings out the worst in a sign. Whenever a planet reaches the last or anaretic degree of a sign, it's about to change signs. It's about to change modes of expression. So one thing is in the process of dying so that another thing can be born. And when something is dying, that's when all the bad stuff inside, it just gets let loose and comes out. Hence, we've seen a lot of the shadow side of Capricorn lately. We've seen a resurgence of authoritarianism and fascism around the globe. So the next few years will be very critical for the future of America and others. Okay, over here in this graphic for 2025 and 2026, you can see we've got a wonderful period here where Saturn is going to be making a sextile to Uranus, and Uranus will be making a sextile to Neptune. And then over here, Saturn makes sextile to Pluto, Uranus makes a trine to Pluto, and Neptune makes a sextile to Pluto. In mid 2025, in particular, we've got Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all making really good aspects to one another. So this is going to be a very beneficial period for the world. This is when some new and higher perspectives are going to be possible. There will be a lot of people whose minds will open up at this time. Those who are a little bit more psychic, they may be channeling things like they never channeled before. Uh, your young men will have dreams, your old men will have visions. Uh, there's a verse, something to that effect in the Bible, but this will be one of those times when we're having higher inspirations and newer perspectives are coming in. And children born at this time, they are going to be very special. As they mature, they're going to be expressing that higher perspective more and more. Now, there is one fly in the ointment that happens during this period, Actually, there are other flies, but in this chart, I have just one fly shown, and that is Saturn conjunct Neptune. That usually produces ideological changes of one sort or another. Saturn represents structure, but Neptune weakens structure. So that is when old structures tend to break apart and new visions, new ways of thinking come in. And historically, uh, big changes have often happened for Russia during Saturn Neptune conjunctions. For example, the Bolshevik Revolution occurred right after a Saturn Neptune conjunction. During the next Saturn Neptune conjunction, we had the death of Stalin and the subsequent de-Stalinization of the Soviet Union. Following that, in I believe 1989, Saturn and Neptune were conjunct again, and the Berlin Wall came down. And there we literally saw a structure dissolving before our very eyes, and that was followed by the breakup of the Soviet Union. So when we get another conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in February of 2026, again, we expect some big changes in Russia. If Putin is still in power, this may be when he goes out of power. We'll have to see. As I say, this is only a weather report. That's only half the equation. The other half is what people decide to do with that weather in response to the weather. We have free will. Putin may have such a firm grip on power that that he might be able to ride out the winds of change. But nonetheless, astrologers are expecting some big change to occur with regard to Russia in February of 2026, if not before. Saturn will get close, very close to a conjunction with Neptune in the summer of 2025, so things could happen earlier, but we don't know exactly what will happen. But this will be a critical moment that we should keep an eye on. Now, over here, I have a table showing when various aspects involving these outer planets will become exact. The dates, not the times, that's going to vary from one place in the world to the other. And I also show sign changes for these outer planets. And that's another big thing which is happening. We're just about to have Pluto go back into Aquarius, where it will remain there for about the next 20 years. Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius, that is a very big change. That always represents a shift in power from individuals to the people. And Saturn has, since 2023, it's been making some shifts back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius. And we have seen unions regain strength. We have seen strikes, collective bargaining. That's all power to the people. We might see revolutions in some places. That's a possibility. But there will be big changes as a result of the 20 years that Pluto is going to be in Aquarius. And Aquarius, it represents not only power being shifted to the people when Pluto is in it, it also represents humanitarianism, charity, working together with others. It represents huge advancements in technology. And when Pluto first dipped back into Aquarius, that is when artificial intelligence began to take off. And we had Chat GPT, soon to be followed by other artificial intelligence engines. So Pluto is just about to move back into Aquarius, where it will remain for 20 years. And in 2025, we're going to have Uranus moving into Gemini. And in 2026, we're going to have Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries. And we will also have, well, let's see, Chiron is in Aries now, but in 2026, it's going to move into Taurus. Now, most of these sign changes, with the exception of Chiron starting to move into Taurus, most of these sign changes are changes from earth or water signs to fire or air signs. Earth and water signs tend to internalize energy more, while fire and air signs externalize it. So there's going to be big changes in the our mode of expression for society and the world. There will be a big uh, impetus around Aquarian themes of humanitarianism, working together, technology, power to the people. There will be an emphasis on uh, Gemini things such as thinking, cleverness, innovation, ideas. And of course, Aries represents the physical energy, physical world, and physical energy, bringing things into manifestation. And uh, the sign of Aries is the first sign in the zodiac, and it's like the baby. So we will be birthing new things. We're going to have these great ideas, these great technologies, and we're going to birth things. We bring things into manifestation in this physical world. Okay. And let me also point out, let's see here. Do I have, yeah, we have Saturn conjunct Neptune around February 20th of 2026. That will happen at 0 degrees 45 minutes of Aries. Now, this conjunction is probably even more important than many past conjunctions because it's not only beginning a new cycle for Saturn and Neptune, it's also beginning this new cycle at the start of Aries. So this is a grand cycle of cycles that is starting. We're starting over the cycle of the zodiac signs right at the beginning of Aries. So some huge shift, some really big change is starting at this point. And of course, the question is, will we notice it immediately? Or will it be only in retrospect that we can see this is when things began to change? For instance, think of the Renaissance. When the Renaissance began, people probably didn't notice it immediately that this was going to be a huge shift, right? They would see some new things coming along, but they might not think that it was so out of the ordinary with the way things had been before. But over time, a clear line of demarcation became present, and people began to realize something big has shifted, and this is when it began. Okay, now, in summary, some of the things that might happen in America over the next few years are, and these are the negative things that could happen as a result of this next Trump presidency. So we could have active oppression of groups and people that Trump sees as enemies. That's something he's promised. We could have a withdrawal of American support for NATO and Ukraine. We could have economic problems brought on by tariffs. Trump has said he wants to put a 10% tariff on all trade. We could have a significant increase in the national debt. This could happen as a result of tax cuts that are not paid for in some form or fashion. We could have a dismantling of critical parts of our healthcare system due to Trump and RFK Jr. We could have a degradation of civil rights, a gutting of our nonpartisan civil service system. That's another thing Trump has promised to do. He wants to get rid of a lot of people in our civil service system and replace them with Trump supporters. We could have a worsening of climate change. Uh, I suspect Trump will try and reverse everything Biden has done in this area and other areas. We could have a rise in bigotry of all kinds, more restrictions on abortion and on a woman's right to control her own health. We could have more conservative courts as more far right judges are appointed. We could have increased conflict for America at home and abroad. Uh, that is something that might happen, could happen regardless of who became president, because we expect that increase in conflict when transiting Uranus returns to its natal position at 8+ degrees of Gemini. But with Trump as president, the conflict could possibly be worse. We could also have mass deportations. That's a Trump promise. And we could have the implementation of all or parts of Project 2025. When this became a campaign liability, Trump tried to distance himself from the Republicans' Project 2025. But now that he has won the presidency, he may have no reason to distance himself from this project any longer. So all of these things are much more probable now under a Trump presidency. But while America will be challenged, the second half of this decade looks brighter for much of the rest of the world. Astrologers expect difficulties for Russia too, but the world in general is entering a period that will see an awareness of new perspectives, new technologies, and transfer of power to the people. Thus, there are likely some very good things lying ahead also. And what can each of us do to make the future as beneficial as possible? It's simple. We can all make better choices as we go forward. And by doing so, we can still create a world of peace and prosperity. The choice is ours. Okay, well, that is the end of this presentation. So let me stop sharing. Oh, and I'm back. Okay, so again, admittedly, I have my biases. I have my political perspective. And you can factor that into everything that I have said today. Uh, if you lean progressive, you will probably agree with a lot of the things I've said. If you lean right or far right, the further right you lean, the more you will probably disagree with my assessment of Donald Trump in the future. But as I say, the proof is in the pudding. The future will be here before we know it. And so uh, within a few years, we will know whether my assessment corresponds to what actually happens in reality or if it doesn't correspond. So I've given you some astrological things that are going on, some dates and times to keep an eye on. And so let's all do our best, make the best decisions we can, and let's keep an eye on things and see what actually happens. Okay, well, that's it for now. And I hope you enjoy me again for more videos. But for now, I'll just say so long and be well.